Hey everybody, welcome back to the next part of my dialing in series for our Line 6 Helix, and this is an exciting one because, as you all now know, we have Line 6 Helix and HX Stomp and native firmware 3.0 that has been wildly anticipated, and it's now been released. And one of probably the most anticipated features in this release, I would have to say, from my reading the forums and hearing people speak about it, is the addition of polyphonic pitch shifting. So you might ask, well, what is polyphonic pitch shifting versus, let's say, the run-of-the-mill pitch shifting that we used to have, which would be classified as monophonic? Well, the difference between monophonic and polyphonic is monophonic is dealing with one note at a time. Back in the day of early synthesizers, it was just monophonic synthesizers. We could play one note at a time. We couldn't actually play chords or any harmonies or intervals on them. If we played one note, played the next one, it would just cancel the previous note out. Those were monophonic. When polyphony came out, though, that was the ability to play a bunch of notes at the same time, be able to play chords and whatnot. So same thing with pitch shifting. The existing pitch shifting before the 3.0 firmware in the Helix was monophonic, meaning if we tried to harmonize a note, it would harmonize that one note, but it would probably get kind of wacky if we tried to do more than one note. Well, with the addition of polyphonic pitch shifting, we no longer have that problem. And we can now have it do many things, harmonize with multiple notes or whole chords. And you might say, well, what advantage is that? And what can we do with it? Well, let's take a look at some of the possibilities with a few of the new polyphonic pitch blocks that we've been given in 3.0 firmware. So let's do this. Let's go over to HX Edit and take a look and see what we have. All right, for today's example, I'm going to be wearing headphones, which you don't see me do too often. I usually just monitor off my studio monitors here. The reason is, a lot of times if we use something like this polyphonic pitch shifting to, let's say, tune down a half a step so that we don't want to hear our original guitar, it's very strange when you're listening coming out of your speakers, hearing the half step down tuned guitar mixed in with kind of the open strings acoustic version of the electric guitar that you're still hearing, and it gives a really jarring sound. So this is kind of to minimize that, and I can kind of hear what's happening tone-wise. So what's happening here is I've created a very simple preset, having path 1A feed into path 2A so that we kind of unlock all the DSP ability here. And the reason is, the new poly models are quite DSP intensive, and in the release notes, the Line 6 folks say that a single block can eat up to 25% of the entire Helix DSP. So we've got to be careful. It's not going to be able to just throw these in willy-nilly and use them wherever we want. So, a quarter of the entire Helix ability would be like taking a half of one of our paths, okay? And you'll actually notice, I'll show you after, that if I try to add it on the same path as some amps, it just doesn't work. So we're gonna have to maybe, if we wanna really use these, we may have to rethink our presets a little more, but that's just part of the way that it works. The other thing is, they are only in mono. There's no stereo versions of these. Okay, so we go down to our pitch synth menu here, and we click on that, and we will see if we go to the stereo block, we don't have any at all of the poly models. If we go to mono though, here we have poly pitch, poly wham, poly capo, and 12 string. And these are going to be what this video is going to be about, these ones here. So let's start off with poly pitch, and you'll notice if I come down to this path that already has an amp on it and try to add the poly pitch or the poly wham, it's not happening. There's not enough DSP on here to handle both. So I'm going to come up here, and now you see why I've split this up. And I'm going to add the poly pitch over to this block. Okay, so let's turn our amp model on and turn the poly pitch off. This is the sound. I didn't really dial anything special in here. This is the sound that I have for demonstration purposes. So good enough to allow us to demonstrate what we need with these poly models. Okay, so let's enable this. Now, we have a lot of controls on this poly pitch, okay? So first of all, let's go through controls one at a time and talk about what they do. Interval is going to be how much we want the pitch shifted in semitones, okay? So if we're at 0, it's not doing anything. If I move it +1, that would be like moving, from open string to a first fret. If I go down, it's going to be like moving it down 1 fret. So it's basically like, think of it in, that's how many frets you're moving it up, or otherwise known as semitones, okay? So we'll just leave that at 0 for now. Sense is going to be kind of a fine tune adjustment, okay? We can go all the way up to plus or minus 50 cents, which is another half a semitone. You might ask why you might want that. Well, maybe you've shifted something, you know, up or down, let's say 12 semitones for an octave lower, and you're mixing it with your dry guitar, but you also want it to sound slightly detuned. We can use the sense control to do that. We'll leave that at 0 for now, though. Shift time is interesting. Now, this is going to be the amount of time that it takes poly pitch to shift the pitch of the note once it's engaged. Okay? So we can set that in either milliseconds. 0 milliseconds would have that happen immediately. And it goes all the way up to 8 seconds. But we could also do it, and this is interesting, on a note time based or note sync based, so it'll be timed with the tempo up here in the corner. This can be very useful to do some very interesting kind of maybe dive bomb effects that are timed with a song, and we'll talk about that after. So we'll leave that right now at 0 milliseconds. The shift curve is going to tell us how quickly or how slowly and what kind of plot, let's say, it's going to take for our unpitch shifted sound to reach where it's going. Now, what we have are different choices. Start slow 5, start slow 4, 3, 2, and 1. So, meaning the shift is going to start moving slower and then speed up, or we can go the opposite. We can go start fast 1 through 5. So it's going to start off faster and then slow down as it reaches its desired destination. And we have linear, which is just going to basically move it very steady across a path. Okay, return time is going to be how long that pitch takes to return to its original note. All right, and again, same settings. We can go time-based or we can go note sync to the musical note. 0 milliseconds all the way up again to 8 seconds or notes, okay? And again, same sort of thing. We can go start slow 5 to 1, linear, or start fast 1 to 5. And it's going to do the same thing the opposite way, returning back to its note, all right? Tracking is interesting. Tracking is giving the ability to do just that, track the notes. What'll happen with pitch shifting effects is, these, as I said before, these are DSP intensive. So in a similar way when we're working with digital audio, if we set the latency very low, so it's very fast, the CPU in the computer is loaded down much more, but we get a faster response. So we don't feel there's any latency in our playing. But if we raise that latency so we actually feel it, where there's some lag in the sound, the CPU kind of gets a little bit of a break and doesn't have to work so hard. So we want to find a fine balance between, you know, the sound being the way we want it to, but the tracking feeling right. So X stable is going to give us, from what I can feel, the most latency, but the best sounding pitch shifting. And when we move that tracking to X fast, then we're going to get a much faster latency, but we will have to listen a little closer to see if the sound is something we want. I'll give examples of all of this in a moment. Okay. Auto EQ is actually some compensation EQ built into this. And if you look at the release notes on this, it says it determines how much compensation EQ is applied to the shifted signal. If the affected signal sounds too harsh when pitched up or dull when pitched down, adjust the setting to taste. When set to 0, no compensation is applied. So if we want it fully compensated, we'd put it up to 10 or somewhere in between. Again, we'll have to use our ears on a lot of this, but understanding what they do going into it will allow us to know whether it's something we want to touch or utilize, or move it to where we need to move it to. Mix is simply going to, as always, mix in our direct signal with our process signal. This is set at 100% by default, and level is just the overall output level. Okay, so let's do this. Let's check this out and see. I'm going to have it pitch down, let's say, a full octave, 12 semitones, okay. Now, one thing I'm going to do is assign this to a pedal, okay? So I'm going to assign this as foot switch 7. So I can now turn this on and off with my foot switch. With it off, here's my tone. Now I'm going to turn it on. So some pretty interesting stuff here. Now, well, let's see what happens if I, move that up by 3 semitones or 4 semitones. Okay, so it's doing a nice job. Now, let's see what happens if we come down to our tracking feature here, okay? Okay, so I think we notice so the tracking, there is a bit of latency and it's not going to track really fast playing when it's set to X stable, but the sound quality is a little bit better. We get less artifacts, but set over here, it tracks better, but we might get some artifacts. So it's going to be a fine tuning it to kind of find out what works the best for us. All right, so that's what that's going to do. Let's just leave it for now at X stable to get the best sound quality out of it. So let's go up to the sense control. Now, if I was to say bring this down by an octave and then mix in 50% of my direct signal. Okay, it's acting kind of like an octaver would do, except I can play 2 notes at a time now. All right, but now if I take the sense control and move it up 50 cents, it's going to be half a semitone off now for the pitch shifted sound. Now that's obviously dramatic. I could maybe come down and move it up 7 or 8. If we just wanted to give it a slightly out of tune kind of a feel to it. Now some folks might say, well, how is this any different than what we already had with the monophonic? Well, now I can play more than one note and have it work, right? And it still works out nicely. Okay, so let's bring that back to 0. Okay, so this is where it gets interesting with the shift time now. What we hear is, there's no difference here if I turn this off and on. It just goes on and there it is, right? Now, if I change this to, let's say, I don't know, somewhere around 4 seconds, watch what happens when I turn it on. Okay, if I turn it off though, it's instant. Well, what if I wanted it to take more time to return? Then I could move my return time the same way. So this could be very interesting. That let's say we wanted this to drop an octave in, let's say, 1 beat, right, on a quarter note, and return in that same amount of time. Now we could do something like this. And you could change those note values to anything you wanted. If we wanted to go 8th note, we could do such. And I'm just doing that with my foot. So very interesting stuff. Now, let's set that to quarter, actually let's set that to whole note. And let's just have the return time go back to 0. Let's check out these different shift curves. So starting slow, it's going to sound like this. Okay, let's do the next one. We'll move it up a little bit here. So just kind of different curves to it. On linear, we already heard that. Now we could have it also start fast. And then slow down versus, let's say, a different start fast setting. So we could set that to time itself to hit on certain beats. We could have some really cool effects going on there, I think. Let's just set these back to quarter. And we have the same thing for the return time, like I showed you, the same sort of return curves as well. Okay, the auto EQ then, let's take a listen to that. Go down to 0. Try that with up an octave. So you can kind of hear with the auto cue off, there's a bit of a harshness to it. If I bring that up to 10, it smooths it out. Maybe too much for some. Let's go back to the default setting of 7. Okay, so a very nice feature. And again, actually, if I go to 100% on that, you can also hear the tracking different with its 100%. So there's definitely a little bit of latency when we have it all the way to X stable. So that's going to be up to us to decide. Now, the other thing is I had this set to 50%, but if I wanted to do this idea of dropping the pitch by a quarter note, I'll do it linear. Let's see what this sounds like now. Very cool. Let's do that. I said dropping, that was raising it. Let's drop it an octave. Now, one really interesting thing we could do is we could actually come over to bypass controller assign and set the type of foot switch from latching to momentary so that, and actually let me turn it off before I do that, to momentary, so that when I hit it, it's going to drop down. As soon as I release the pedal, it's just going to turn back off again. And I could have the return time do the same thing. Right, and I could change the return curve if I wanted. make those both work faster if we wanted going to eighth notes. Right, so a lot of really interesting ideas here, and I'll just change that back to latching. All right, so that's what the poly pitch does. Now, what if we change that to poly wham? All right, so this is going to be like basically a polyphonic whammy pedal. And again, we can change the heel shift. We have the position, which is going to be controlled by our expression pedal. The difference is now I can do it with multiple notes at a time. And I can change the heel shift, so when I'm in the heel position, I could go down an octave or to any semitone. Again, measured in semitones. So much like a normal whammy pedal, again, we have tracking between X stable and X fast. Auto EQ, again, same thing we went over with the poly pitch. We could have it mixed with our dry signal. So, you know, in the heel position, we're getting it mixed with our dry signal down an octave, and then in the toe position up an octave. So much like a normal whammy with some other cool bells and whistles. Now, poly capo is kind of cool because what this is going to allow us, we could kind of accomplish the same thing with poly pitch, but with a lot more functions there as well. We still have the tracking between X stable and X fast. We still have our auto EQ. We'll leave those alone. We already know what those do. If I set the mix to 100%, this would allow this block to just act like a capo would. Let's say I just wanted, you know, turn this off, and I was at, here it is without it doing anything to the sound. Let's say I wanted to act as if I was capoed up a fret. I move that up. Capoed up 3 frets. Let's say I wanted to tune down a full step with distortion. Okay, now some folks would probably ask, where should I place these in the chain? Now, I believe it's recommended to put these first so that the poly pitch shifting is acting off of the clean guitar sound. So it's not getting a very harmonically rich sound after the distortion. But having said that, what if I do drag this down after? Versus before. You know, it's going to be up to you to decide, but I'll probably keep it before. let's take the tracking now down to X fast. So it's going to be up to you, depending on the feel versus the sound and how you want to set that. But all the settings work, and you know, it's going to be real personal preference as to how we want to work with that. So that's what the Poly Capo does. And then finally, I'm going to turn the amp off here, and I'm going to switch this to 12 string. So this is a 12 string guitar simulator. And like I said, I'm just going to take the blend down to 0. So blend is going to be how much of that 12 string effect is going to be blended in with this. Let's go up to 10. Bring that down a little bit. Versus with it off. But we're also given an EQ to kind of mess with that. Let's bring the bass down to 0. I find with the bass down, it kind of gets rid of any of those maybe little artificial artifacts. Gives a very nice usable sound. If we bring that treble up to 10, kind of helps it to cut a little more. Treble down to 0. Bass up to 10. Not crazy about it with the bass up. I kind of like it a little more with the bass down. Then we can decide how much of that effect we want blended in. And that's all I'm going to do with that. Okay, so that's it. Some of these are very simple control parameter layouts, some a little more complicated. Obviously, the Poly Pitch has the most parameters we got to worry about, but many of these spill over into the Poly Wham, the tracking, the auto EQ, the mix, the Poly Capo, same thing. So pretty interesting stuff. I hope that was a clear run through of this and something that can help you guys kind of just understand what the controls are doing, understand where to maybe place it and the different, what the controls do to affect our sound, so that when you actually get in and start using it, you're going to be able to kind of instinctively dial up some settings that you probably will know will work for you. But there will be some experimentation for sure, especially with the tracking control to find out how much latency you're willing to have versus the stability of the sound. But some really interesting possibilities with these, and I think a big hats off to the folks at Line 6 for adding these in and really bringing the Helix up to a whole new level now that we have these. So I hope that was useful and helpful. Please like the video, share it with anybody who you think could get use out of it if you don't mind. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I'll be back soon with some more content. A lot more 3.0 stuff coming actually really soon. Go check out my other video, which was like my top 5 favorite features of 3.0, so it might be something in there you haven't realized is in there that can help you out. So I will be back soon, guys. Thank you so much again for your time, and ciao for now.